Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our Opus 5 set reviews. Today we'll be talking about the lightning cards of the set. So the first card we'll be talking about is Red Mage. It's a 2-cost backup for 2 dull, choose 1 forward, deal it 1000 damage. If it is active, deal it 2000 damage instead. Now this card seems like a multicolored variant of the backup that we received in Opus 2 called Ninja, which was a 2-cost backup that was a lightning dull, choose 1 forward, deal it 2000 damage. So Red Mage is conditional, is more conditional in that it only deals 1000 damage if the forward is not active, but it does allow you to play the cost with any with colors other than lightning. But considering this set has a lot of cards that really sort of emphasize playing a mono lightning type build, I definitely don't foresee this Red Mage seeing all that much play. Mono lightning is going to be quite strong this set, I believe, from for considering one of the legendary sets in this set. So in that regard, I don't really foresee this Red Mage seeing that much play. I do potentially foresee the older ninja coming back into play. Next, we've got Assassin. It is a 2-cost forward at 2000 power, so it is below the curve. It's got haste. When Assassin attacks, choose one forward of cost 2 or less, dull it. So this card is not really a card that Lightning particularly needs, and that Lightning already has ways to give its guys haste. And it's already got plenty of removal, so generally any forward that's cost 2 or less is pretty easy for Lightning to remove, so it's generally not an issue. And generally most of the cases, most forwards of cost 2 or less are pretty small, so as long as you play a forward of 3 or more, generally those forwards will be able to attack over it anyway. So this Assassin doesn't really sort of deal with any problems that that Lightning may sort of face. The one potential reason why this card might see play is in Golbez's decks, because it is a 2-cost forward that does have haste, so that does have some potential uses there. Even though it says that it has to choose a forward of 2 or less when it attacks, this doesn't ever have to be a drawback, in the sense that if you have other 2-cost forwards and your opponent has no 2-cost forwards, you can always just dull the Assassin on declaration of the attack. So Assassin can always just choose to waste her ability. You don't have to force your other 2-cost forwards to dull when Assassin attacks. That being said, it doesn't really add that much. And compared to the Opus 3, there was a ninja that's 2-cost haste as well. That was a little bit bigger. So ultimately, this does give a slight amount of utility on top, but it has a significantly smaller body to compensate. Next, we have Allure. It's a 3-cost forward at 6000 power, so it is below the curve. It does have haste though, so that does sort of like generally put it to about the correct size. During each turn, when Allure is chosen by your opponent's summon or ability for the first time that turn, cancel its effect. Now, this is a really strong ability. It means that this card can has like an inherent amount of protection on it. So if your opponent doesn't have bodies to combat it, then it's generally very difficult to stop this guy from attacking, because it does have a bubble. Like, it does protect against the first ability for the turn. So that's pretty strong. In addition, it's got like one of the strongest S abilities that we've seen probably in the game in general, called Shield. So S, just purely S. Activate all forwards you control. They gain haste until the end of the turn. All forwards and opponent controls lose 2000 power until the end of the turn. So this is extremely strong. This is both good on offense and defense. If you play a whole bunch of guys, Allure can just like discarding a card, can give them all haste and then send them in. Because your opponent's forwards lose 2000 power as well, generally means that your guys are going to be pretty strong and going to be able to attack through. Considering how Allure has that ability to prevent abilities from targeting her like the first time each turn, Allure is generally going to be one of those forwards that's going to be quite resilient, so it's going to be able to stick around. So this card actually seems pretty strong. It definitely does seem to lend itself more to aggressive decks, but potentially I do see a world where Allure comes as a part of a combo deck, in the sense that activating all your forwards and giving them all haste is actually a really, really strong ability. It definitely seems like there is some sort of crazy combo potential for this card as well. As for like a mono lightning, I'm not sure if this card really sort of fits that, but definitely the Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 2, the FFTA 2 cards generally seem to be tending towards more aggressive play. I'd be very interested to try out a TA2 deck that has Illua, Luso, and Adele, and play it very aggressively and see how that deck runs. The fact that there is only one copy of Allure means that you won't be able to pull this this ability off too often, but inherently, because Luso has ways to search for FFTA 2 cards, as well as having the category searcher in Lightning as well, does make it a slightly more likely that you'll be able to pull off this S ability, and it's a very, very strong S ability when you do pull it off. Next, we got Odin. It is a free cost summon. Select one of the two following actions. Choose one forward that costs 3 or less, break it. Choose one monster that costs 3 or less, break it. Now, this is a pretty interesting summon. Like on one hand, breaking a forward cost 3 or less is strictly alright. There are plenty of forwards that are cost 3 or less that are very, very good. But generally, you want to be hitting forwards that are cost 4 or lower at least, because a large majority of those really powerful forwards tend to be at that 4 cost mark. But on the other hand, the ability to hit monsters of 3 or less actually hits a large majority of monsters. Pretty much any monster that isn't a transforming monster will be able to be broken by this Odin. So this Odin seems to be more of like a secondary Odin. So decks probably won't rely on this as one of their primary sources of removal. 4 cost Odin or 7 cost Odin or even Raiden or Exodus, these are all better ways to remove forwards. But this seems like one of those cards that you can easily add into a deck as a 1-off or a 2-off to be able to counter like monsters or have that option available to you. So if your metagame does start having problematic monsters, and I've been talking about this a lot, there's a lot of really good 2-cost monsters from this set, then like I definitely foresee this Odin being chucked into most decks, or most Lightning decks, as at least a 1-off copy to give these decks like an opportunity to deal with certain problematic 2-cost monsters, especially any of those ones that have dull abilities that are really sort of annoying to play around. Next, we got Twilight Odin. It is a transforming monster, so it's a 4-cost monster for lightning until the end of turn. Twilight Odin becomes a forward of 7,000 power. When Twilight Odin deals damage to your opponent, choose one forward opponent controls, break it. You can only use this ability once per turn. So this is a pretty strong card for a couple of reasons. So first of all, so if this does successfully attack your opponent, you get to break one of your opponent's forwards. So the simple fact of having this forward on the field does force your opponent to play a little bit more defensively. Even if you got no forwards on the field, your opponent can't just like swing in with all their guys, because if they leave their field open, then it allows you to transform your Twilight Odin on your turn, attack back and kill one of their forwards. So that is something to note. Something else to note is that it can target dull forwards as well. So Lightning typically has a tough time dealing with forwards that have been dull. So Twilight Odin is actually very good against that. So a lot of decks against Lightning will try to keep their forwards dull so they can't be hit with Acid, and that makes it very difficult for Lightning to deal with those forwards after they have dulled themselves. Now Twilight Odin does give you the option, or does give you the ability to force your opponent to keep some forwards active. And if your opponent just taps out and has all their forwards dull, then Twilight Odin can go in and break one of your opponent's forwards, dealing damage and forcing your opponent to lose a forward as well. It's actually pretty strong. Cost-wise, it seems alright. So this card is not a fantastic card, but it is a card that fulfills a need that Lightning needs. So potentially, depending on like how much space are in the Lightning decks, I do foresee this card maybe seeing a one-off copy in the metagame to see how it really sort of works out. Next, we have Scholar. It's a 2-cost backup. So for Dull, put Scholar into a break zone, choose up to 2 active forwards on opponent controls, deal them 3,000 damage. This card is actually pretty good in terms of its value. So dealing 6,000 damage for no CP cost, really. It's just like dulling and breaking the backup is actually pretty good in terms of value. But it is quite conditional. So it is quite conditional in that it has to choose 2 active forwards, and it has to and it deals them both 3,000 damage. So both the damage, the damage generally isn't going to be lethal in most cases, and you're only able to choose active forwards as well, so that it does limit it. But this card actually has solid value. So in certain decks, potentially in like the Wind Lightning deck, dealing 2 guys 3,000 damage actually is pretty solid. And like this in combination with potentially a Lightning Fire deck might be able to really help out certain fire decks. Pinging 2 guys for 3,000 damage generally will allow most fire cards to use their like 5,000 or 6,000 power nuke abilities to just straight up kill those guys. So this card is a little bit niche in its use. Definitely, it seems more of a assistant card in terms of it assists decks that already have a certain archetype or a certain theme to them. But yeah, in that regard, it's actually really good value. So if it does fit into the theme of the deck or does the strategy of the deck, this card is actually very good. Next, we have Sid of Clan Gully. It is a 3-cost backup. It's just the category searcher for FFTA2. So when it enters play, search for a category FFTA2 forward and add it to your hand. Generally, this is just like same as all the other category searchers. In this game right now, there's not a lot of FFTA2 forwards. Pretty much the big forwards you'll be looking at Luso, Adele, and Elua, and then you have a couple of standard units there. So right now, this card is like, although it's the same value as all the other category searchers. Because FFTA2 doesn't have a lot of targets right now, this card doesn't seem particularly strong in terms of like the themes or the archetype that it sort of builds into. So yeah, because of that, this card will only really see play in that specific deck, and outside that, like, yeah, I don't really think FFTA2 is going to be all that competitive. So yeah, so like I don't think you'll see this card too often. Next, we have Kalia Cheval. It's a 4-cost backup. When Kalia Cheval enters the field, you may search your deck for one job a Judo Cadet and add it to your hand. So this does include both forwards and backups. So yeah, in this set, we did get some Judo Cadets. So we got 5 Judo Cadets. 3 are in fire, and 2 of them are in lightning. So yeah, the thing is that most of these Judo Cadets, only one of them has interactions with Type 0 Cadets. So there's not a lot of synergy between the 2 different types of cadets, and there doesn't seem to be like much synergy amongst the Judo Cadets themselves as well. So this card, like, sort of, yeah, definitely works into that. It works in with those category cards, but that, like, they can't even build an archetype by themselves. So because of that, this card probably won't see any play because a Judo Cadet isn't really a viable archetype at all. Not to mention it's also a 4-cost backup. And it searches a very narrow amount of targets, so this card should have been an EX burst, or it should have been a 3-cost searcher. So this card, like, statistically is just a little bit more expensive than it should be, and the targets that it's searching for are generally very good. Talking about Judo Cadets, here's Kuon. It's a 2-cost backup. When Kuon enters the field, you may cast 1 summon that costs 2 or less from your hand without paying its cost. So effectively, it kind of becomes a free, it brings in a free summon when you put this backup into play. But generally, like, a 2-cost summon is pretty easy to cast as well, and you have to lock it onto Kuon, so that is pretty annoying. This doesn't stack with any sort of summon discounting ability. So if you have the water unit that reduces your summons from 3 to 2, it doesn't stack with this, or it doesn't work with this. You have to play a summon that strictly costs 2 or less, like a printed cost of 2 or less. So that being said, this card isn't particularly amazing. You could have just played those 2-cost summons by themselves anyways. It gets you a very slight amount of a discount on that summon. But yeah, it's not particularly amazing, and there's no reason to play a Judo Cadet, so there doesn't seem to be any reason to play this card at all. Next, we have Black Knight. It is a 2-cost monster, and it sort of forms, it's a part of that of those auto trigger monsters from this set. So when a forward of your opponent when a forward of your opponent of cost 4 or less enters the field, put Black Knight into the break zone if you do break it. So this is a compulsory trigger, so you have to trigger it on the first forward that your opponent plays. The if you do really means if you successfully manage to send it to the break zone, then yeah, trigger this ability. Now this effectively is an Odin in the sense that it does break a forward of 4 or less. You don't get to choose which one, but at the same time, this doesn't choose forwards. So certain forwards that can't be chosen by abilities or can't be chosen by summons will trigger off against this. Not to mention it is a 2-cost monster, so it is actually very, very cheap to put into play. So this is actually a pretty good value card. And yeah, so like monsters are actually really, really good value this set. So a lot of them seem to be really good. The fact that it's 4 or less, that hits a large majority of forwards. So obviously the downside is that your opponent gets to choose what forward gets lost. At certain times your opponent can play specific forwards that sort of they want to sacrifice, or certain forwards that can sort of dodge these abilities. So you are leaving yourself open to that, but in general this card is very good value, and if you just play it as a value card, or if it's just something that you pull back for free, using one of those effects that bring monsters into the game, then yeah, this is actually a very good way to do that. Next, we got Fancrank. It's a 4-cost forward at 8,000 power. It's a sign of the 7th Dawn. So if you control a sign of the 7th Dawn other than Fancrank, Fancrank gets plus 1,000 power. If Fancrank receives damage while dull, the damage is reduced by 2,000 instead. So this card, it doesn't seem to be like super good value until you consider like the support that other sign of the 7th Dawn brings to the table. So it's very easy to have another sign of the 7th Dawn character on the field because a large amount of them are backups. So as long as you got one of those backups, this guy's basically going to be a permanent 4-cost 9,000. So that's all right value by itself. Now, if Fancrank receives damage while dull, the damage is reduced by 2,000. This basically means he's a very good attacker, or he's an aggressive attacker. He can attack, and generally he's going to survive most blockers that do block him. And yeah, considering how like one of the lightning scion backups, Alisei, gives all you guys a haste. It does combo with this card very well. He can come in at 4 CP. He's got haste inherently, and he's able to attack through at 9,000 power, and he doesn't receive that much damage. So it's actually a very good attacker. The problem is that Scion of the Seventh Dawn, there's not enough of those forwards in the game at the moment, so it's very difficult to build this as an archetype. But yeah, as we start seeing more Scions being released in future sets, then yeah, definitely you'll be able to build this archetype, and this is going to be one of those cards that you're going to be putting into deck pretty quickly. Next, we have one of the lightning legends of this set, Zemus. It's a 4-cost forward at 8,000 power. For X dull, choose one lightning forward in your break zone. If its cost is X, play it onto the field. You can only use this ability during your main phase. So, people have immediately thought, oh wow, this card's crazy because it allows you to bring back Alcid, allows you to bring back Edea, allows you to bring back Armon from your break zone. So yeah, so I think this card is like quite strong, but I do have like a very tempered expectation with this card. So first of all, it is a 4-cost 8,000 power forward. So like in terms of stats, it's on curve. That being said though, forwards that are 8,000 power are still removable, and he doesn't inherently give you any value the moment he comes into play because he doesn't have any value straight away. So you generally have to wait until it comes back to your turn again in order to use his ability. Now, even though Lightning does have Red Mage, which can give you guys haste, you're generally not going to be able to like really bring anything relevant back with Zemus on the same turn, because you spend 4 CP to put the Zemus down, then you spend another 2 CP to Red Mage to give him haste, and then you have to spend additional CP to bring a guy back. So if you want to bring even like an Alcid, you have to spend 4 on this, another 2 on Red Mage, and another 4 on the Alcid itself, and that's 10 CP, and you have to have the Onion Knight or the Rigdia to combo with it. And yeah, don't even get me started on trying to bring back something like Edea, so that's being like 11 CP, so that's a lot. So yeah, so in most cases, Zemus is going to be one of those forwards that you put onto the field, and you have to wait for it to cycle back to your turn. So with that in consideration, Zemus definitely lends itself into 2 archetypes, I think. So one is definitely Mono Lightning. So if you do put him down and he does manage to survive back to your turn, he's actually extremely powerful. Spending 5 CP to put down an Edea from your break zone, put it onto the field, destroy one of your opponent's forwards is actually really, really strong. And yeah, of course, bringing back Alcid or any of those number of lightning forwards that like remove forwards is actually really, really strong. The limitation of being only able to do it during your main phase is very fair, in the sense that you can pull off some very crazy shenanigans if you can do stuff during the combat phase. So that is fair, and it is also limited to lightning forwards as well. So yeah, so overall this card's a pretty strong card. The second archetype that this card sort of like would probably fit better into are like a lightning wind or a lightning earth deck, because those additional colors do give you ways to protect your Zemus, whether it's through the earth package or whether it's through the like wind protection package. Protecting your Zemus is really strong, and if you do manage to protect it and keep it around to your turn, then yes, you can pay X to bring in lightning forwards. Even though you're not able to bring in forwards of your secondary color, the fact that you're only paying X and there's no like color requirements means that you can use any amount of colored CP to bring back lightning forwards from your break zone. So yeah, so personally, people are probably going to immediately jump to Zemus as a card for Mono Lightning. But yeah, if that's the case, then that means you'll be facing a lot of Mono Lightning decks, which means that Alcid Onion Knight is going to kill this guy every single time, and especially towards the later part of the game, Edea is going to blow it up every single time as well. So, and yeah, because of that, I definitely do think people are going to jump on Zemus as a Mono Lightning deck, but I think it's got a better place in a dual color deck with Earth or Wind to protect him, and if you do protect him, he becomes very, very powerful. Next, we have Destin. It's a 2-cost backup. The cost to play a card named Clady, Treeon, or Piège onto the field is reduced by 1. It cannot become 0. So yeah, so it's a backup that reduces the cost of its children from what I heard. So yeah, he's a king from F11 that makes his children cost 1 less to enter the field. So in this set we do have Clady and Treeon, but Piège is not in the game as a card just yet. So this is probably going to be a card that does come up in a future set. Not being able to reduce them to 0 is fine. It's just like a general rule for these sort of cards. So yeah, so we'll be talking about Treeon a little bit later in the set, but we got Clady here, which is it's a 2-cost backup that reactivates princes or knights. So yeah, so this is definitely going to be building into the knight archetype. So yeah, And considering how Treeon is pretty solid, and Clady also provides a very good amount of support for Knights, and Lightning and Water both having Knight support, definitely I do foresee that this is a very playable card in these colors. Definitely, like I tried building Water Lightning Knights last set, and I just felt that there were a couple of cards off, or just a couple of cards short from being able to make it happen. And I think this set we've really sort of hit this critical mass in that we can now build a viable Lightning Water Knights deck. Next we have Bunker Beast. It's a 2-cost monster, so for Dull, choose one blocking forward, it loses 2,000 power until the end of the turn. So even though 2 CP4 monster is like, it's a little bit expensive in the sense that you have to spend 2 CP as opposed to those cheap 1-cost monsters that you can play for 1 backup, this power is actually, pretty powerful in the sense that, yeah, you can reduce your opponent's, your opponent's blocking forwards by 2,000 power. So it is, it does have the limitation of that your opponent has to block in order for use this ability to reduce that power, but it does mean that you can play it very aggressively, and it does work very well with Lightning decks, and that Lightning does tend to play a lot of forwards that have removal abilities, but to generally have smaller bodies. So Alcid, Onion Knight, both forwards is 6,000 power, Black Waltz 6,000 power, Rigdia 5,000 power. And generally, after you get them onto the field, as soon as your opponent is able to play it forward, your forwards generally find it very difficult to attack through. Now, generally, you're limited to using party attacks to attack into your opponent's larger forwards, but with Bunker Beast, you can always just threaten your opponent's blockers as well. So all of a sudden, your Onion Knight and your Alcid can fight against 8,000 power forwards, and Bunker Beast just creates a ongoing offensive pressure against your opponent. And this is why I'm saying that monsters are going to be very prevalent in this metagame, just because a lot of them have a very good ongoing ability that don't require CP, that just dull them. And yeah, this basically just allows your forwards to just constantly put down pressure. Now, even though it does have the weakness of if your opponent's forward is no longer blocking, in the sense that if they remove or destroy your attacking forward, then their defending forward is no longer blocking. Even though it has that weakness, because this card effectively costs nothing to use its ability, you're forcing your opponent to remove your free cost and your free cost 5,000, free cost 6,000 forwards, and generally you're playing them for their enter play ability. So your opponent is spending resources getting rid of your forwards that aren't huge pressure forwards, and because of that, your opponent is spending a lot more resources trying to deal with your guy, or because you have Bunker Beast threatening them, threatening to make them more stronger in combat, or making your opponent's blockers weaker in combat. So this card seems very strong, and yeah, in a mono Lightning deck, I definitely foresee this card seeing play. Just playing in Adia, which isn't very strong herself, just a 6,000 power forward, then having Bunker Beast to be able to send her through, and generally because you're playing Lulu to give your guys plus 1,000, which pushes your guys up to 6,000 or 7,000 power forwards, Bunker Beast will allow your forwards to trade against larger forwards, and it's just a very good ongoing pressure. So I think that this card is very good, and if I were to play Mono Lightning in this format, I would definitely chuck in at least 1 or 2 copies of this card. Next, we got Treeon. It is a 4-cost 8,000 power forward. It's a knight that has the ability of job knights other than Treeon you control, gain plus 1,000 power. So at 4-cost 8,000, it is on curve, which is fine, and it has the power to give all your other knights plus 1,000, which is fine as well. So yeah, it does seem a little bit bland in that there's not a lot of text, and its body is just on par. That being said though, if you do have Destin as a backup, then he becomes a 3-cost 8,000 power forward. So that's actually very good value. That also gives you guys plus 1,000 power. So that's actually very, very good. And considering, yeah, he's only going to be played in the Knights deck, giving your other Knights plus 1,000 power is very, very good. And having them on a cheaper body is also fantastic. So yeah, really, really interested and actually keen to build this Lightning Water Knights deck and show you guys how fun these guys can be. Next, we have Nagi. So it's a 2-cost backup. It's an Judo Cadet. Choose one. For Dull, choose one forward blocking a Class 0 Cadet. It loses 1,000 power until the end of the turn. So this is the only Judo Cadet that has any sort of synergy with Class 0 Cadets. So yeah, so definitely this is a pretty cost-effective ability to have. But yeah, obviously it only works into the Class 0 archetype. Yeah. The problem with Class 0 Cadets is that if you're playing a tricolor, you generally have a very full backup line. You have a very full backup line in the sense that a lot of stuff are going to be Moogle to buff your guys, and a whole bunch of cadets that are in your back row. Now, Nagi would potentially see play if you were to play a Judo-colored Class 0 deck. So if you're playing Lightning Wind or Lightning Fire, then I can definitely foresee Nagi being able to slip in there as an additional lightning backup for you to use that also has decent synergy and also has a reasonable cost as well. But if you're playing Tricolor Cadets, I don't think you have the backup space to use it. So yeah, it's only going to be useful in Judo-colored Cadets, and even then, like Cadets are just like a very iffy sort of archetype, especially right now, because there hasn't been a lot of support for them. And yeah, so if you want to build a fun Cadets deck, then definitely, yeah, maybe chuck this in, but otherwise, I would not recommend this card in general. Next, it's Ravager. It's a 2-cost forward at 5,000 power, so it is on curve. It is a standard unit as well, so like a couple of points there for value. Its ability is Lightning Dull, choose one active forward, deal it 4,000 damage. Now, this card is very similar to a card that we got previously in Opus 3 called Zangetsu, which was a 3-cost 6,000 power forward, so it's a little bit below curve, that had 2 abilities, but primarily used the second ability of Lightning Dull, choose one forward, deal it 4,000 damage. Now, 4,000 damage is actually a pretty good packet of damage to deal, and for Lightning Dull, that's actually a pretty, very cheap way of dealing it as well. The issue is that, yeah, Ravager being a 5,000 power forward does make it generally pretty easy to kill, and it does have to target an active forward. So those are 2 big limitations that do limit its scope, even though its cost effectiveness is actually pretty decent. Yeah, in a situation where you do want to include something that can deal that 4,000 packet of damage, I would generally err towards the side of Zangetsu, just because it's a little bit bigger, so it's able to fight a little bit better, and also it's able to deal damage to active and dull forwards as well. So because of that, I do think Zangetsu kind of outshines Ravager. So yeah, because of that, I generally don't see much reason to play her. Next, we got Cannoneer. It is a 2-cost backup. So for Lightning Dull, put Cannoneer into Break Zone. Choose one blocking forward. It loses 3,000 power until the end of turn. So this card, I feel, is the Lightning variant of Monk, in the sense that, yeah. So it's a combat pump that you can use only on offense. Yeah, only on offense, because yeah, you're debuffing a blocking forward. But for Lightning Dull Break, it's actually reasonably well costed, and losing 3,000 power is pretty solid as well. So it's definitely stronger than dealing 3,000 damage in most cases. So yeah, this card's not bad. Yeah, so definitely it does seem to be does lend itself to be like a more combat focused lightning deck. So yeah, if you are playing cards like Bunker Beast, then potentially Cannoneer does sort of build into that as well. So yeah, it's a pretty solid card. Definitely not something that you're going to chuck into every lightning deck. But considering that there are so many good 2-cost lightning backups, yeah, it's going to be very difficult for this card to find a place in existing lightning decks. Potentially, I do foresee potentially one copy of this falling to a lot of mono lightning decks to clear up backup space, and also just making forwards lose 3,000 power at a pretty cheap cost is also pretty good value by itself. Next, we have Dark Knight. It is a 2-cost 4,000 power forward, so it is below curve. For Lightning, deal 1 damage to all forwards and opponent controls, and 2,000 damage to Dark Knight. So first thing to note, so even though this Dark Knight will probably kill itself with this ability, you can use it multiple times. So you can stack this ability multiple times, and on resolution, even though after the second tick, it'll probably kill Dark Knight, the other ones will still resolve. So you could spend 5 CP, put this down 5 times, and even though Dark Knight dies on the second resolution, the other 3 will still resolve, yeah, and deal your opponent's forwards damage. That being said, though, it is a pretty costly ability in that you have to spend kind of 2 CP on this Dark Knight to begin with, and then you have to spend additional CP to ping their guys for 1,000 damage for each ping, and you lose the Dark Knight as well. So it is kind of a pretty cost-prohibitive way to do it, and generally I wouldn't recommend it in general. So yeah, in general, you're probably going to be playing other lightning cards to deal your opponent little packets of damage. Even though it does spread 1,000 to all forwards and opponent controls, that doesn't really sort of justify its cost. Next, we got Lightning. It's a 2-cost forward at 5,000 power. It's got haste. At the end of the turn, return Lightning to its owner's hand. Now, this is a card that I actually find very difficult to sort of conceptually consider where does this card really belong. So yeah, it's a 2-cost forward at 5,000 power. So it's fine statistically, and it does have haste, so it's actually got decent value. But that does make it on par with a card that we have since Opus 1, Onion Knight, which was a light forward of 5,000 power that also had haste, that also had a secondary ability to return it to your hand. Now, this Lightning, it seems on paper it wants to be like an aggressive card that you can sort of put this down and like after it's attacked, it's not vulnerable to your opponent's stuff, so you can bring it back to your hand so you can play it again on your following turn. But the thing is that that's actually pretty CP intensive in the sense that like you're spending 2 CP to attack your opponent, and you're not sort of building you're not building your position forward. Generally, if you have 2 CP open, you're probably going to be trying to put down backups. Generally, in the early game, if you have 2 CP to spare, you'd much rather put a backup down than try to put this like 2 cost haste 5,000 power forward in the field that's going to return back to your hand. Now, like obviously, yeah, towards the later part of the game, then like if you've got plenty of backup space, backup resources to use, you're generally going to want to spend those backups to play bigger forwards that generally give you a much game-winning pressure, whether it's something like a DL or Alcid or Gilgamesh or whatever, or Zemus. They're generally going to be your bigger plays once you have more backups. So because of that, I don't really like foresee any situation where you would really want to play this Lightning, even though it's got an interesting mechanic. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any reason to play this Lightning. It does seem pretty cool and flavorful, but there doesn't seem to be much use for it in the game at all. Next, we got a 1-cost summon Ramu. It's an EX burst. Choose 1 damage forward, deal it 7,000 damage. Now, this card is actually very good in terms of its value. So, yeah, it's 1 CP summon that deals 7,000 damage. But the caveat is that it has to choose a damage forward. Now, yeah, so obviously, like, in any sort of deck where you do have ready to go ping effects, such as a Lightning Wind deck, you can use a Cactuar to deal 1,000 damage and remove another 7,000 damage. So that's basically 8,000 damage of like total damage that you spent like 1 monster and 1 CP to do. So that's actually really, really good in terms of its cost. But other than that, like the rest of this card is generally all downsides. So like generally like with those decks as well, you already have forwards that are able to like capitalize on damage forwards, whether it's in the form of Onion Knight or whether it's in the form of Barbarisha or Orlando. And so you are paying extra, but you do get a body on top. Yeah, so Ramu, the only benefit to it is that it's an EX burst. Now it is an EX burst that's more difficult to play with because you have to preemptively deal damage to your opponent's forwards, in the sense that if your opponent attacks you and you flip over Ramu, if your opponent's forwards hasn't received any damage, then Ramu doesn't get to finish anything off or doesn't get to do anything. And yeah, at that point, it's too late for you to use Cactuar to deal 1,000 damage to your opponent's forwards to trigger off Ramu. So in order to like, you have to predictively, or you have to just like use Cactuar just like randomly, just as a card to deal your opponent's forwards 1,000 damage, in the off chance that you hit Ramu as an EX burst. So yeah, so definitely if you're a slightly more forgetful player, there are going to be plenty of times where you like flip over Ramu and you're just like, oh man, I totally forgot. I should have just pinged your guys for 1,000. And because of that, it does make this card a little bit more cumbersome to play. And like I generally wouldn't recommend it for like sort of beginner type players. But yeah, on paper, it's actually pretty solid value. But decks generally are competing very hard for cards to put in decks. So because of that, I find it very difficult to put this into a pre-existing Lightning deck. Next, we have the secondary legend of this set, and this is one of those legends that seems like it's got people very split up on it. So Ramza, it is a 6-cost forward at 6,000 power, so it's significantly below the curve. It is a knight, so it's a couple of points there. The cost to reduce Ramza the cost required to play Ramza onto field is reduced by 1 for each forward you control. It cannot become 0. For each forward other than Ramza you control, Ramza gets plus 1,000 power. If Ramza has 10,000 power or more, Ramza gains haste. When Ramza attacks, choose 1 forward of cost 3 or less opponent controls, break it. So this is a card that I see as like the Lightning's variant of Bartz. So Bartz was this legendary that we got in Opus 3, where he got stronger the more forwards you have, or the more jobs he got, which was directly related to number of forwards that you had, right? So Ramza is a Lightning variant of that same sort of style. So let's sort of break it down. So like assuming that you have no buffs on the field, Ramza after 2 forwards becomes a 4-cost 8,000 power forward. So it does become like on curve after you have 2 forwards on the field. Yeah. Once you get to that 3rd forward, Ramza actually becomes really good value in that it becomes a 9,000 power forward at a 3 cost, so that's actually really good value. And yeah, if you do hit that 10,000 power mark, then she does gain. Oh man, this is bad. I'm pretty sure it's she, right? No, he. It's a he. So he does gain haste and that ability to break a free cost forward when he does reach 10,000 power. Now this card doesn't have to use its own ability to trigger that 10,000 power threshold. So if you have ways to buff it, generally if you have a forward that can buff it, or if you have backups that can sort of give additional buffs, and the fact that it is lightning and the fact that it is a knight means that there's a lot of ways that you can just buff Ramza as a sort of as a anthem or sort of like a board wide buff. So yeah, in those cases, Ramza becomes significantly more easy to trigger off. And breaking a forward of cost 3 or less is actually a very strong ability, and giving it haste as well, like on a body that's probably going to cost you 4 to 3 CP is very, very good. Now, obviously the big problem with playing multiple forwards on the field is that it does lend you to being more vulnerable to board wiping type effects. And because Earth definitely does seem more prevalent in this metagame, so you're going to be facing a lot of Shantoto. So I do foresee situations where yeah, the lightning deck player might feel that it's a good idea to play 3 forwards and then follow up with a Ramza and then sort of push through, and they get to have a cheap and powerful Ramza, but then all of a sudden they just like get their board wiped by some sort of board wipe ability, such as Cloud of Darkness or such as Shantoto. So yeah, so it does any of these cards that get cheaper or get stronger the more forwards you have on the field are very difficult cards to play, in that they leave you very vulnerable to board wiping type effects. That being said, though, it does have a pretty good place in Lightning, in the sense that Lightning has plenty of ways to play sort of like smaller, medium-sized guys. Alcid is just like one of those cards that just keeps coming up. Alcid kills a guy and puts 2 bodies on the field, which helps Ramza like trigger off her ability and reduce her cost. So it does fit synergistically very well, just like how Bart's fits in very well in Win, because you're able to play a lot of forwards as well. So yeah, so both these, so Ramza is a powerful card, but it is conditional. So you have to build a deck that sort of does utilize its ability effectively, and you also have to play it carefully as well. Next, we have Dragoon. It's a free cost forward at 7,000 power. It's a standard unit. And for Lightning, Dragoon gains first strike until the end of the turn. So despite Dragoons being a bit of a meme, it's actually, like the Dragoon decks actually is like kind of semi-viable. Or it's definitely casual viable. So yeah, so the big plus to this Dragoon is that it is a Dragoon on curve. Most of the Dragoons that we had in the game all seem to be below curve, even though there's like a plenty of ways to buff your Dragoons. It's great to have a Dragoon that's just straight up on curve. Older Opus 1 Dragoons were like free cost Dragoons that had haste or first strike, but were 5,000 or 6,000 power forwards, so you had to buff them to get them onto curve. It's great that we now see a Dragoon that's just straight up on curve, and that you can also just pay a little bit extra to give it first strike. But yeah, like in general, you're probably not going to need first strike. If he's just bigger than your opponent's guy, then that's straight up fantastic. But in certain situations where your opponent is party attacking, or you're against a color that may try to do ping damage, then yeah, giving him first strike is always a welcome option as well. The fact that it is free cost means it's great, because there are certain synergies with it, such as Gladiator, that backup that does return standard units that cost 3 or less from your break zone back on the field, does work with this card pretty effectively. So yeah, so Dragoons seem like a fun deck. Like previously when I was streaming, I did have some fun playing the Dragoons, and yeah, this is just like a great little addition for the deck. Next we have Lusois. I think that's how you pronounce it, Lusois. So I think it's a French name. So it's a free cost backup. When Lusois enters the field, search for one card named Alisai or a card named Alphanord and add it to your hand. So both those cards are 2 cards that come in the new starter deck, the new Sign of the Seventh Dawn starter deck. Yeah, so the reason why you probably won't see this card see that much play right now, simply because there just isn't enough Sign of the Seventh Dawns in the game at the moment. There were very, very few cards that were Scions in the general set, so basically you're limited to pretty much what they give you in the starter deck, plus like 1 or 2 other cards on top. So because of that, this card is probably going to see play in those Scion decks, because they're just really scraping to get any sort of cards into their deck. Most of the time when you play this backup, you're going to be searching for Alphanord, because Alphanord is a 2-cost backup, and Alisai gets cheaper when you have Alphanord on the field. So in general, you're going to get Alphanord onto the field first before you play Alisai. That being said, this card should have been an EX burst. We have seen previous situations where a backup that searches for 2 very specific cards, generally it's an EX burst. So I'm a little bit disappointed that this card isn't an EX burst. It wouldn't have been overpowered if it was. And yeah, so this is just obviously going to build into Sign of the Seventh Dawn deck. Yeah, which is an archetype that's very unfulfilled at the moment. Scion of the Seventh Dawn just seems like it feels like it's in a very similar place of where the Zero Cadets were, except Zero Cadets got a lot more support. Yeah, so Scion of the Seventh Dawn just seems really, really limited. And yeah, so like because of that, you're probably not going to play this card unless you're playing Scions. And even then, like Scions is just not going to be a very fun deck for you to play because you just don't have that many options to play in the deck. And those are all the cards for Lightning for Opus 5. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. What do you guys think of these cards? Were there any cards that you think are overrated or underrated? Were there any sort of interesting combos that you guys thought? Yeah, do let me know in the comment section below. I do respond to you guys. I do sort of like chat back and respond. So yeah, if you have any sort of feedback or comments, definitely let me know as well. If you enjoyed this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. It helps out with the YouTube algorithms. And otherwise, I'll catch you guys tomorrow where we finish up with, actually no, there's still quite a lot, where we do the water cards of Opus 5. So until then, Grand J out.